Good afternoon, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So, in this video, we'll be discussing the important articles for the UPSC Civil Services examination. So, the first important article of the day is that Supreme Court says there is no need for extra curbs on free speech of the ministers, and it says the government is not vicariously liable for the disparaging remarks made by the ministers because it is not possible to extend this concept of collective responsibility to any and every statement orally made by a minister outside the House of the People or the Legislative Assembly, which sounds practical. And there's one more view, that is, we can say the dissenting judge has to say that state has an obligation to intervene when acts of a private actor may threaten the life or liberty of another individual. So she says that we need to have like being a minister or being a public figure, it becomes important uh, on what you are speaking, because that can have different liabilities and it can be a threat to someone other's life. So that is her view. And in a country like ours, where there is a multi-party system and where the coalition government, they are often formed, it is not possible at all times for the prime minister, the chief ministers to take the whip whenever a statement is made by someone in the council of ministers. So this is the majority view. And now we'll be discussing what is the dissenting judge's view in detail. So she says that if traceable, if these statements that are made by the ministers, if they are traceable to any affairs of the state or for protecting the government, can be attributed vigorously to the government by invoking this principle of collective responsibility, so long as such statements they represent the view of the government too. So if this condition is satisfied, then we can attribute and we can use the principle of collective responsibility. And if such a statement is not consistent with the view of the government, then it is attributable to the minister personally. So this is what she has to say and she believes in. Now, again, we have talked about this, that Prime Minister, he addressed the 108th Indian Science Congress, which is happening in Nagpur in Maharashtra. So we know that the theme this year is sustainable development with women empowerment. And he says, Prime Minister said that our thinking is not merely to empower women through science, but also empower science by the contribution of women. So he says that he gave the example of Mudra Yojana, which has been instrumental in empowering women of India. Then this article is, we can say, related to development versus the environment. So here, the Odisha's State Pollution Control Board, it will be holding fresh public hearing regarding granting of the environmental clearance to the Malli Parvat bauxite mining lease in the Koraput district. So this incidence is that there is, we can say, a Malli Parvat bauxite mining, and it is the lease was given to the Hindalco Private Limited in 2007. But obviously the villagers, obviously there are a lot of villages surrounded, and the people, they opposed this step, and they said that there are around 36 perennial streams which are flowing down from this Mali Parvat, which are source of water for the villagers for agricultural and drinking purposes. So till 2011, the company, that is Hindalco Industries Limited, it failed to carry out the mining, and subsequently its environmental clearance also expired. But between 2012 and 2014, it started the mining illegally without going in for renewal of the environmental clearance. So this is the issue, and you should also find out more about what is the Goldman Environmental Prize. And this, we can say, this is also associated with the cultural beliefs of the people. And they say that our deities, which is, we can say, Pakuli Devi and Patkanda, they reside in this Mali Parvat. So that is there. And let's see that what comes out of this issue. So this is, we can say, it is based upon the major theme of the broader theme of development versus environment. Then coming to the editorial section, firstly, this article is regarding preventing animal cruelty, which is a duty of the state. So it's revolving around prevention of cruelty to animals. So a constitution bench of the Supreme Court of India will deliver its verdict on the validity of Tamil Nadu's, we know, the Jallikattu practice. So soon we expect the Supreme Court to deliver its verdict on the same. And Jallikattu, it's a sport where men compete against each other to hold on to the humps of agitated bulls that are released into an open arena. And this is practiced, we can say, in the state of Tamil Nadu. And back in 2014, in the Animal Welfare Board of India versus A. Nagaraj case, a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court, it declared Jallikattu as illegitimate. And the court found that the practice was cruel and it caused animal unnecessary pain and suffering. So on that basis, the Jallikattu practice was held illegitimate by the Supreme Court in 2014. But now again, this issue is in news because since then, the state of Tamil Nadu has taken steps and it has made efforts in order to, we can say, to legitimize this practice. And we can say a petition has been filed in Supreme Court regarding the same. So let's see what is going to be the Supreme Court verdict. But in 2014, Supreme Court held it illegitimate. So talking about animal rights and safety. So none of the guarantees which are contained in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, which relates to the fundamental rights, none of them, they are explicitly conferred on the animals. And articles like Article 14, which talks about right to equality, and Article 21, that is related to the right to life and personal liberty, they are bestowed on persons, and nowhere we see any mention of animals in these articles, or even we can say whole of the fundamental rights. So no doubt some of the directive principles of state policy and the fundamental duties which are there in part 4 and part 4a of the constitution respectively, they somehow reflect a responsibility which is placed on the state and on human beings to protect and improve the natural environment. But these are unenforceable obligations. So the fundamental duties and the DPSPs, they are, we can say, they are legally not enforceable as fundamental rights are, but we do not find the word basically the fundamental rights in the context of the animals. So they are bestowed upon the persons, or we can say the human beings. So therefore, when efforts to legislate on the animal welfare that were first made by the Indian Parliament, they did not emanate as much out of a belief that animals were vested with the rights as they did from a more elementary ethical precept that our collective conscience ought to make it clear that it was morally wrong to inflict unnecessary pain and suffering on the animals. So it was on this basis that the parliament legislated a law that it is morally wrong and it is not out of, we can say, any belief that animals were vested with any rights. So it was on moral grounds that the parliament came up with a law, that is Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act in 1960. And talking about one of the shortcomings of this act, so while it criminalizes several types of actions that cause cruelty to animals, but it exempts, for example, from its coverage the use of animals for experiments with a view to securing medical advancement. So this aspect is not covered by this law. And uh, but it is clear that, as the Supreme Court previously affirmed in its judgment, A. Nagaraj judgment in 2014, is that the Jallikattu falls within the boundaries of the actions forbidden by this PCA Act, that is Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, and that is very clear. But after it was, we can say, banned by the Supreme Court, what the Tamil Nadu state did was that it amended the PCA Act in 2017 Basically, when this act was amended in 2017, it uh, firstly, we should be knowing that the subject of the issues which deals with cruelty to animals, it falls within the concurrent list. So both the state and center, they are empowered to legislate upon this subject. And what the Tamil Nadu did was that it specifically excluded this Jallikattu practice from the confines of the statute's various protections. So this is what it did in order to, it was basically trying to make it a legitimate or a legal act, and it did not want this act to be, we can say, banned, because of the reason that it gave us, because it is one of the important cultural activities for the state. So these are certain reasons which are cited by the state of Tamil Nadu. And that's how this, we can say, amendment was done on the part of Tamil Nadu state. And as far as the current petition is concerned, so what the petitioners have to say is that the judicial review of the legislation can broadly be made on two grounds as of now. And the first one should be whether the legislature, it possesses the competence to enact the law, and second is on whether the law violates one or the other of the fundamental rights delineated in part 3 of the constitution, that is, which is concerning the fundamental rights. So petitioners, they claimed that Tamil Nadu's amendment, they failed on both these grounds. And so it says that since the state of Tamil Nadu, the state legislature, it excluded the Jallikattu practice from this Act of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, it has the effect of condoning the cruelty on animals, and hence must be seen as a colorable action that bears no nexus to this entry number 17 that concerns the issues related to cruelty to animals. So the petitioners, they say that whatever amendments were done by the state of Tamil Nadu, they must be seen in a separate manner. They must not be seen as connected to this entry 17, because they tried to keep, or they were successful, or the next step that they did after 2014 judgment was that they kept this Jallikattu practice out of the PCA Act. So this is one thing. And secondly, the petitioners, they submitted that the Supreme Court arrived at a very clear finding of the fact and law in 2014, clearly banning this practice of Jallikattu. So in A. Nagaraj case, the court had held that Jallikattu in and by itself, it amounted to a violation of the existing provisions of the PCA Act and fundamental duty that was contained in Article 51A, subclause G. That is, it requires the citizens to protect and improve the natural environment, including forest, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for the living creatures. So, citing these two grounds, that firstly, it violated the fundamental duty under Article 51A, subclause G, and secondly, it violated the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. So, on these two bases, the Supreme Court back in 2014, it banned the Jallikattu practice. So, the effect of this violation, the court held, had a direct bearing on the right to life contained in Article 21. So the court says that this violation from the practice of Jallikattu, it had a direct bearing on the right to life contained in Article 21, because the bench, it was conscious that right in this Article 21, it is no doubt conferred only on the human beings, but it expanded the meaning of the word life over the years. Basically, it, we can say, saw the word life, its meaning in a broader context, which was not only specific to the human being's life, and which now included a right against disturbance to the basic environment, or to mean that animal life must also be treated with intrinsic worth, honor, and dignity. So, this is what the court said. And the later argument that on infraction of the fundamental rights, so we can say that the second argument that was put forward by these petitioners, then it raises more questions, that it raises some new questions like, do animals, they also have personhood, given this basically Article 21 will also used by Supreme Court. So given that there are certain new questions that are raised, that do animals also have personhood, or does our idea of justice include a guarantee of animal rights also? Because as of now there are no clear animal rights mentioned in our constitution, and if not, do we still owe a duty of care towards our fellow creatures? So what does that duty entail, and how does it balance with other rights guaranteed to human beings? So these are some new questions that are there, and we need to find answers to them. Now, talking about care towards the animals, so there's a famous saying by a philosopher, Martha Nussbaum, who says that our duty of care towards animals needs to hardly originate out of our similarities to them. So we must instead see each form of animal life in all its beauty and strangeness, and it becomes important to protect their life. So, life is today understood to mean something more than mere existence. It means an existence that allows us, among other things, to live in a clean and healthy environment. And indeed, it is possible to argue that a human right to a healthy environment would include a human right to animal welfare also. So, we see that the meaning of right to life is way beyond than having a right to life, and basically specifically being specific only to human rights or human beings only. So there are different perspectives in which we can see and decipher the meaning of right to life, and also meaning of the word life. So it also includes, as we say that the human right to life, it also includes the human right to animal welfare also, because as we say that it is not just limited to a mere existence, that we say that we have the right to life. So it is not just limited to being mere existence, but it also means having the right to clean and healthy environment, and which also includes the right to animal welfare. So that is all about this practice. And now let's see what is going to be the Supreme Court's verdict on the same. Then yesterday we talked about the Supreme Court's decision on the demonetization process, and it said that it did not find any faults in that. So we see that, however, Supreme Court it missed on certain things, which includes that. So basically the main argument that was given by Supreme Court supporting its judgment was that demonetization survived the test of proportionality. So it included that there was a legitimate purpose behind this process of demonetization, of the exercise of demonetization. Secondly, there was a nexus between the action and the objectives, and the court did not have the expertise to suggest a less intrusive way of achieving these objectives. So this is what was analyzed under the proportionality test, and however it does not properly address the question on whether the adverse consequences could have been limited or not. So this part was missing in the judgment, and the court had nothing critical to say about the government's failing to anticipate the ruinous effect of extinguishing the value of 86% of available currency on the economy and the immense miseries it heaped on the population. So even this thing was missing, that it did not basically reflected upon this. And yesterday also we talked about the views of Dr. Manmohan Singh sir, who said that given the economic situation that existed at that point of time, it was not the right time to go ahead with that step, because it is going to be having negative repercussions for the Indian economy in the long term. So that was missing in the Supreme Court's judgment. Then in the next article, here it is talking about the multi-domain operation. So it is in the context of our national security. So this article is saying that it is important to understand what is multi-domain operations. So these are not just the actions on land, in sea, or in air, in cyberspace, or in the electromagnetic spectrum. It comprises the operations that are conducted across multiple domains, as the name suggests, and their contested spaces through convergence of capabilities. to overcome the adversary's strengths by presenting it with operational or tactical predicaments. So it is like not just limited to individual spheres, but it talks about convergence of capabilities, and secondly, it talks about common operating picture. So what do we mean by common operating picture? It means that, for example, there is Army's coastal missile battery, and that can be used to strike an enemy's naval vessel detected by the radar of an Air Force aircraft. So you can see the synergy of actions using Army's, we can say, weapons to target or attack enemy's navy, and the missiles, or we can say the threat, is detected by the Indian Air Force. So that is what do we mean by the common operating picture. And then we need to go ahead with a four-pronged strategy. So what are going to be the four prongs or the four elements of the strategy? First one is that in the short term, the traditional physical domains, they must be stabilized with critical deficiencies of the services being plugged. So this is the first thing. Secondly, our C3 networks, that means command, control, and communication networks, they need to be hardened and protected against the cyber threats, and they need to be linked and synchronized in such a manner that seamless exchange of data is ensured. So this is the second aspect. The third aspect being that in the long term, a pilot project must be started now so that the true challenge of creating an MDO, that is multi-domain operations environment, is grasped. And then we also have to further resolve the challenges that occur in a period of time. And lastly, that to get the fundamentals of the MDO right, it is vital to train and educate the personnel starting right now, and it is important to develop and have a critical thinking and problem solving skills at the operational level of the war. So these are the four areas that we need to focus upon as far as we can say the multi-domain operations are concerned. And technology has definitely changed the face of the war, and history is witness to perils on the battlefield if scientific advances they are overlooked, and battlefields they too have changed from physical brawls to cyber and precision strikes. So we can say that's how the warfare, the battlefields have changed with time, and that's how our strategies they also need to change in a synergetic manner. Then we see, if we see the link between diabetes, wealth, and awareness, we come to see that a person with a higher awareness of diabetes has a better chance of beating the disease regardless of their wealth levels. So we can say that if we focus more upon spreading the awareness about diabetes, we'll be able to tackle this challenge. And also, we see a stark difference was observed across all the states with diabetes incidence increasing as the years of schooling reduced. So there are two things. We need to increase the awareness, and secondly, we need to focus upon increasing the years of schooling. So it was witnessed where the years of schooling was less, the cases of diabetes were more or they were higher in number. So these are, we can say, two factors which becomes important when we talk about tackling diabetes. Then talking about a recent, we can say, UNGA resolution that was introduced regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict that has been going on since years. And here we'll be discussing what is the root cause and how did it all started. So let's start with our discussion. So here we see that basically how Israel it has altered its occupation of Palestinian land over the years. So we see that official Israeli statistics they show that Jewish settlers, that is the Israel the territory that is, we can say, the main Israeli territory, it houses the Jewish population. So the official statistics they show that Jewish the settlers they existed in the historical Palestine even before the state of Israel was declared in 1948, and UNGA resolution it had earlier sought to partition the British Mandate Palestine, but that did not happen and it was rejected by the Arabs. So Arabs population live in Palestine and Jewish population is there in Israel. So then Zionists, they went ahead declaring independence and triggering the first Arab-Israel war. So that's how the first war started, and this, we can say, the idea to partition the British Mandate Palestine was rejected by the Arabs. And when the war was over, the Israel, it had captured more territories than what the UN plan had proposed. So this is, we can say, first thing where Israel went wrong, and this led to some 7 lakh Palestinians being displaced. And historical Palestine, it was divided into the state of Israel. So the historical state of Palestine, it got divided into several parts after this, the end of the first Arab-Israel war. So we'll be looking at what are the different parts. And the first one is, we saw the creation of the state of Israel, which had a control over the West Jerusalem. Second is creation of West Bank, which includes the East Jerusalem, that was overtaken by Jordan. Then we saw the coming of Gaza Strip, which was controlled by Egypt. So you need to please open up your maps and locate all these locations on the map, because this is very important topic. Then we saw that tensions, they kept on rising between Israel and 3 other countries in the region, which included Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. So the conflict exists between all these states, and this led to a 6-day war of 1967. And when we look at the outcome of this wars, it resulted in Israel capturing the West Bank, which was controlled by Jordan. It controlled the Gaza Strip, which was under the control of Egypt, and East Jerusalem, and along with the Syria's Golan Heights and the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. So we see that Israel captured all these regions, and gradually with time, then we saw that Sinai Peninsula, it was returned back to Egypt, and the other captured areas of Palestinian and the Syrian territory, they still remain under the control of Israel's military. And later on, Israel, it also declared the whole of Jerusalem as its eternal undivided capital, which was also identified by USA. And however, it, like Israel, it withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Its external borders, they are still under its control. And UNSC resolution passed. It passed a resolution in late 1967 stating that Israel must withdraw from the territories, and that is yet to happen. And the fate of Palestinian self-determination remains uncertain. So Palestinians, they seek the West Bank as the heartland of a future independent state, which is, we can say, right now under the control of Israel. And also, entire Jerusalem has been claimed as the capital by Israel. So Palestinians, they seek that, and Israel has constructed dozens of Jewish settlements in West Bank alongside the 3 million Palestinians living under the Israeli military rule today. And in the most of the international community, that also considers Israel's West Bank settlements as illegal and an obstacle to peace. So incidents of violence and killings of Palestinians by Israeli forces have become common over the years. So that is the whole issue. Now, what becomes important for you is to locate all these important locations, the different parts, be it West Bank, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula. We have then Jerusalem on the map. And recently, why this topic was in news is that UNGA, it introduced a resolution that asked the body's highest court, that is the International Court of Justice, to render its opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's prolonged occupation of the Palestinian land. So that was a recent development, and there are 2 possibilities now when a referral to ICJ is made. So it can either lead to a settlement with the party withdrawing its case, or it can lead to a trial followed by a verdict. So while the rulings of ICJ, they are binding, but it does not have power to enforce them. So this sentence becomes important for PT also. And you should be clear with the entire conflict between Israel and the Palestine. Then Supreme Court says that not all religious conversions are illegal. This sentence come in the backdrop of it, we can say, assessing the provisions, that is specifically section 10 of the Madhya Pradesh Freedom of Religion Act 2021. So it was hearing Madhya Pradesh government's appeal against the High Court's decision that froze this mandatory provision, which required a person who desires to convert to another faith to give a 60-day prior intimation to the district magistrate. So this section 10 of this act was, we can say, frozen by the High Court, and now even Supreme Court says that not all the religious conversions are illegal. Plus we have the right to fundamental right under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, and the change of religious faith is not motivated. And this basically section 10 under this act was introduced so as to ensure that the change of the religious faith is not motivated by force, undue influence, coercion, or allurement. But again, this section was put on hold by the High Court, and the word propagation in Article 25 of the Constitution. So, Article 25 of the Constitution deals with the right to freedom of religion. So, this article, it did not give the right to convert another person to one's own religion, but to transmit or spread one's religion by an exposition of its tenets. So that is the actual right, and you do not have any right to convert another person's to your own religion. And the Constitution bench had held there was no fundamental right to convert another person to one's own religion. So that is the whole issue, and that was the provision that you had to give a 60-day notice to the DM if you wanted to convert to another faith. Then, as we were discussing, as we just first discussed the first article today that was regarding the freedom of speech of the ministers. So the dissenting judge, she says that warning the public functionaries, which include celebrities, ministers, to be careful about what they say in public, because definitely it can have repercussions. And she said the right to dignity of common man cannot be sacrificed at the altar of free speech. If the statements made by the dignitaries, it created inequality and it vilified the sections of society or the individuals. So we discussed the whole judgment as the first discussion today. And a president has to say that the Constitution is the basis of vibrant democracy in India. It is a living document, and it was the foundation of India's vibrant democracy, which was the largest in the world. So, with the spirit of sensitivity towards each section of society, the Constitution was capable of incorporating the changing hopes and aspirations of the people. So here you should be knowing that purse seine nets, it relates to fishing, and Supreme Court raises the concern on the interest of the small fishermen if we promote fishing by the purse seine net. So the issue is that the state of Tamil Nadu, it has we can say it has given the permission for the usage of this technique of fishing beyond the 12 nautical miles in the territorial waters. And if this goes ahead, so it would be having, we can say, negative repercussions or consequences on the interest of the small fishermen, because if you will be going ahead of the 12 nautical mile region, then you'll be catching the big fishes and then and there. So what about the interest of the small fishermen who cannot travel such a long distance? So Tamil Nadu government's order of Feb 17 2020, it allowed it banned the large nets which were used to catch schools of fish in the deep waters of the sea, and it had allowed this purse seine nets technique. So Supreme Court is basically trying to highlight what about the interest of the small fishermen community, which is their sole livelihood opportunity that they have. Then talking about the UNSC reform, so our external affairs minister, he says that permanent members they are not in any hurry to see the UN reform. So he alleged that those who are enjoying the benefits of the permanent membership, who enjoy the veto rights, they are not in a hurry to see the reforms. And you will have a situation when the world's most populous country, that is India, it will not be amongst the permanent members of the Security Council of United Nations. So what does it say about the state of United Nations? And also, he also addressed Pakistan as the epicenter for promoting, we can say, cross-border terrorism, and the world needs to be concerned about terrorism. So developing countries, they remain vastly underrepresented. That is also one of the pending reforms when we talk about the UNSC reforms. Then coming to the business page, we see this news article in the context of a step towards rationalizing subsidies. So India said to $17 billion cut in the food fertilizer subsidy, and the 26% reduction in subsidy spending is aimed at reining in the fiscal deficit. So in order to control and contain the rising fiscal deficit, this step has been taken, and also large part of savings are expected from the end of a COVID era free food scheme, that is the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, and we discussed about this in detail, and where the government has also taken a decision to provide free food grains under the National Food Security Act. So talking about this, we have a target of 6.4% of the fiscal deficit this year, and spending on fertilizer subsidies will likely fall to about rupees 1.4 trillion from almost 2.3 trillion. We can say a drop of almost 1 trillion rupees. And that is a step, we can say, in the context of rationalization of subsidies. And RBI is likely sold dollars to stop rupee falling below the 83 level. So this is one of the ways through which RBI can intervene in the forex market in order to control the depreciation of the domestic currency. And that's what RBI did. And we have been seeing that Indian rupee has been the worst performing Asian currency, and it has depreciated by almost 10 to 11% in 2022. Because of the major factor has been the major capital outflows from the Indian market. Now let's now shift to the Financial Express. So Satya Nadella, who's the chairman and CEO of Microsoft, he says that cloud technology and artificial intelligence is going to be a game changer, and it will foster innovation, create broad economic progress, and accelerate the growth of business in India. So we'll be seeing more developments in this context. And from editorials, our Prime Minister says that in the field of science, India has found its place in top 10 countries of the world. Until 2015, in 130 countries, India was in 81st place in the Global Innovation Index. And now we are there in top 10 countries of the world in the field of science. And in 2022, we leaped to 40th place in the Global Innovation Index. So almost, we can say, jump of almost 50%. And in the PhDs and startup ecosystem also, India is among the top 3 countries. So which is a great achievement for us. And talking about the recent developments regarding the regulation of the online gaming industry, we see that what happens in cases where a consumer is not satisfied with the grievance redressal of the gaming firm concerned. So here we are discussing the shortcomings of the recent regulations and the step that has been taken regarding the regulation of the online gaming industry. So this thing is missing, that what would happen when the consumer is not satisfied with the grievance redressal of the gaming firm concerned. And in case of social media platforms, the government has talked about creating a grievance appellate body, but there is no such provision has been mentioned here when we talk about the gaming industry. And similarly, how would disputes between the gaming platforms and the self-regulatory organization be adjudicated? So when we are not clear with that, and if the answer in both the cases is going to be that first the government and then the courts, then we can say that the self-regulatory organizations, they would have a limited role, because then we'll be having the government first, that is, we can say, political interference, and the government would end up driving the regulations on a case by case basis. So these are certain concerns and the missing elements which needs to be addressed. Talking about the textile industry in India, so textile gains for India, we see that India has gained an advantage over China and Vietnam in overall textile exports to the US because of the twin advantage of lower power and water cost. So the cost of raw materials, we can say, is very low in India. And that is one of the major advantages for the growth of our textile exports to USA. Talking about a major competitor, we can say, is Bangladesh, and it has succeeded in the garment exports, which is more labor intensive than spinning or home textiles, as the cost of labor is lower in Bangladesh, even even in when we compare it with the cost in the India. So in this table also you can see we have uh, made the comparison when it comes to the input cost. So when we look at the labor cost in India, it is around 160 to $180 a month. In Bangladesh, it is 110 to 120. In China and Vietnam, it is higher than that in India. Talking about the water cost, so it is the lowest in all the four countries. In power, we have, again, we are competing with the cost that is there in Bangladesh. And in this first table, we can see that in 2011-20, China was at rank 1, and gradually by 2021 and in also 2022, India has taken the position of China when we talk about the geographical shift in orders for the spindles. So India has, we can say, received the highest amount of orders for spindles in 2021. And talking about rank 2, so there was Turkey. So Turkey remains at rank 2. India was at third. So now China comes at the third rank. And fourthly, we have Uzbekistan. And now fifthly, US has been replaced by Pakistan. So we can say that Vietnam and India, they benefited from China's losses. And that's how we are moving ahead. So lastly, we'll be discussing about the gas sector, which needs sound regulation. So this topic is extremely important. So we see that India's gas economy is facing severe constraints owing to, first, the stagnant domestic output. And while a high-level panel had recently backed that we need to come up with pricing freedom as the reforms, issues relating to regulation of the pipeline networks, they also needs to be addressed. So we see that regulation of the gas sector, when we talk about the downstream sector, the Petroleum and the Natural Gas Regulatory Board was set up under this PNGRB Act of 2006. So this regulatory board became statutory, and it regulates the laying down or expanding of the transmission pipelines for gas and petroleum, and also the city or the local gas distribution networks. So what are the powers of this regulatory board and what are the limitations? So this regulatory board, it can impose fines up to rupees 25 crores for non-compliance, with additional fines of up to rupees 10 lakh for every day. So it has that power to impose fines. Then the board lacks a clear mandate to ensure a competitive gas market. Gas price is regulated separately by the center, and free pricing, if we come up with the reforms as we are saying, suggesting that we need to come up with free pricing for gas industry, so that will ensure more upstream investment and competition will foster fair play in the market. And it is also argued that the pipeline tariffs, which are fixed by the regulatory board, they are on the basis of common carrier principle, which does not incentivize efficiency much. And regulator is also not seen as having been effective in thwarting the monopoly that has been created in the city gas distribution. So these are some of the concerns, and one reform that has been suggested is coming up with the free pricing that would encourage more competition and more fairness in the industry. So pricing and other new developments. So prices, they are benchmarked against four international hubs, which includes the Henry hub of US and Mexico. Then we have Alberta for Canada, national balancing point for European Union, and we have Russia. So the prices, they are revised on half yearly basis. And given Russia's war against Ukraine, the global LNG prices, they have skyrocketed. So recently, the Kirit Parekh Committee has recently proposed a lower price band of between 4 to 6.5 MMBTU for the short term for the normal fields, and it pitched for complete pricing freedom for the producers by January 2027. And talking about what are the recent changes and regulations that this board has brought in. So it is proposed to introduce a unified pipeline tariffs effective from financial year 2024. And the motto is one nation, one grid, one tariff. Then the tariff regulations are being eased to promote faster capacity creation, and new capacities will be exempt from tariff regulation for 5 years, and new tax rates will apply only prospectively. So this is one of the incentives in order to attract more of investment. And India's gas pipeline network is expected to rise from 16,000 kilometers in financial year 2019 to 34,600 kilometers by early 2024, and piped gas connections will reach 60 million by 2030 from the current level of around 10 million. So, given these estimates, we need to come up and implement these reforms in the gas industry, in the gas sector in India. And now we have to take up the mint. So in Mint, as we were discussing about what are the shortcomings as far as the gaming industry regulations are concerned. So we see that will gaming rules, they will tame the foreign betting players. So firstly, when we look at this graph, it is showing that online gaming in India, it is expected to grow to $8.6 billion by financial year 2027. And we are seeing rapid expansion in the gamer base, and also the number of people who are ready to pay for playing the games. So even we are seeing an expansion there. So in this graph, when we look, it is for the overall market, and it is showing from the financial 2021 22, and for 27 what are the estimates. So it is going to it's going to be growing to up to $8.6 billion. Then real money games have been increasing, and it is expected to grow up to $4.6 billion. So that is there. And then what are the changes in the amendment? So the draft notification, it defines online gaming as any game that is offered on the internet, and it is accessible by a user through a computer resource if he makes a deposit with the expectation of earning winnings. So there is no differentiation between the game of skill and the game of chance, and it is like singly defined what do we mean by online gaming. So how can it affect the overseas firms? So overseas betting firms, they were so far, they were not affected by the online gaming rulings at Indian courts, but will now have to come under the ambit of the regulations if they are to continue their operations in India. So they will be affected. They will have to comply with the new norms and the regulations that will be implemented. Then does it segregate the game of skill and chance? So as I said, there is no segregation as of now between them. And how will it affect the Indian startups? So most industry stakeholders of India's online gaming industry, they have supported this amendment and the new development, and that is there. So homegrown startups, they believe the move will help the domestic firms and also safeguarding the interest of the people who are playing games. So will online gaming fall under the center's ambit? So no, that is not going to happen. And according to lawyers and the industry experts, the IT rules are only a set of rules that offer a basic compliance oversight on the online gaming service providers. So they'll be basically, as of now, they'll be self-regulated through the self-regulatory organizations that are identified by the ministry. And so we'll end it by what the Microsoft chairman has to say, that if you want to have economic growth going forward, you have to have a growth paradigm that does not consume energy at the rate at which we consume right now. So, on that note, let's call it a wrap. And thank you for joining in, Sarkari. We'll see you tomorrow. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel.